They scrambled emergency air traffic control when the Black Hawk approached with critical engine failure. No backup systems, no alternate landing zones. Protocol demanded immediate crash preparations until air traffic controller Sarah Navigator. Chen's voice cut through the chaos with unprecedented authority. Tower, I have safe approach vectors. The flight coordinator they denied flight status due to insufficient qualifications was somehow guiding a crippled aircraft to the only landing zone that could save 8 lives aboard the damaged helicopter. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories that reveal how the most denied opportunities often create the most crucial expertise, consider subscribing for more content that explores the extraordinary capabilities of those who prove their worth when everything is on the line. The early morning light was just breaking through the cloud cover over Fort Carson Army Airfield when Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell entered the Flight Operations Center at 0615 hours. The pre-flight coordination teams maintained their systematic preparation for complex aviation operations, faces focused on weather reports, aircraft status displays, and mission planning documentation spread across multiple workstations. Mitchell moved with the deliberate pace of a career aviation officer, his steaming coffee untouched as he approached Major Lisa Rodriguez at the primary flight coordination station. Mission status, he said, his voice carrying the authority of 29 years in military aviation operations and flight safety management. Major Rodriguez straightened from her position over detailed flight planning charts, her hands pausing over GPS coordinates and tactical route analysis. All primary flight assets operational and mission-ready, sir. Weather conditions optimal for planned reconnaissance mission involving 2 UH-60 Black Hawks and supporting drone assets. She gestured toward the mission planning displays showing detailed topographical maps and flight corridors. Mission parameters include high-altitude reconnaissance over contested terrain with potential for enemy anti-aircraft activity. Mitchell approached the mission planning display, examining the complex flight routes and operational requirements. Crew assignments and qualifications verification. All flight crews certified and mission qualified, sir. Detailed mission briefings completed for primary and backup crews. All aircraft systems checked and verified operational. Mission timeline approved and coordinated with Ground Operations Command. The lieutenant colonel's expression reflected the serious nature of the aviation mission. High-altitude reconnaissance over contested terrain represented one of the most challenging and dangerous types of military aviation operations, requiring exceptional pilot skills, comprehensive planning, and precise coordination between multiple aircraft and ground support elements. Weather forecast for operational area? Marginal conditions with potential for rapid weather changes, sir. Cloud ceiling variable between 800 and 1,200 feet with intermittent precipitation. Visibility conditions adequate, but could deteriorate rapidly during mission time frame. Mitchell's eyes scanned the weather analysis and mission parameters. Continue final preparation procedures. Ensure all personnel understand the operational risks and emergency procedures for this mission profile. As Rodriguez coordinated the remaining mission details, Mitchell stepped away to review the complete operational plan. This wouldn't be the first high-risk reconnaissance mission he had authorized, but the combination of marginal weather conditions and potential enemy activity created unusual challenges that required exceptional planning and execution capabilities. 45 minutes later, with all flight crews briefed and aircraft prepared for departure, Mitchell made his way to the flight line. Major Rodriguez, authorized mission commencement. All aircraft cleared for takeoff according to planned mission profile. The mission authorization activated throughout the airfield where Chief Warrant Officer David Falcon Thompson was conducting final pre-flight checks on his UH-60 Black Hawk. His attention focused immediately on the mission commencement announcement, and within minutes, he was coordinating with his crew for immediate departure according to the approved flight plan. Staff. Sergeant Maria Eagle Santos, his experienced crew chief for the past 18 months, was already completing final aircraft systems verification when Thompson approached. Mission authorization confirmed, primary reconnaissance flight departing in 15 minutes. All crews to aircraft for immediate departure. Came the announcement over the flight operations communication system. Neither flight crew member spoke as they rapidly completed their pre-flight verification procedures, checking aircraft systems with the automatic precision that came from extensive training and numerous high-risk aviation missions. Only when they were reviewing the final mission parameters did Santos break the focused silence. "Another high-altitude reconnaissance over hostile territory?" she asked, scanning the mission briefing data with practiced efficiency. Thompson nodded, studying the detailed flight plans and potential threat assessments. "Weather conditions are marginal, and intelligence suggests possible enemy anti-aircraft activity in the operational area. This one requires maximum attention to navigation and threat avoidance." "Fourth high-risk mission this month," Santos noted with professional concern. "Someone's pushing the operational tempo pretty hard." "Whatever the mission requirements, standard procedures apply," Thompson replied, his face reflecting the intense concentration that had earned him the call sign Falcon. He had received that designation not for speed, but for his exceptional situational awareness and ability to navigate complex flight environments while maintaining tactical effectiveness. Among the aviation community, his reputation for precise navigation and flight safety had become legendary. As they approached their aircraft for final departure preparations, Thompson performed his standard pre-flight inspection with characteristic thoroughness, his trained eyes detecting any potential mechanical issues or operational concerns that less experienced pilots might overlook. Behind him, Santos conducted similar preparations, though with noticeably less systematic attention to technical details. "Remember Afghanistan?" Santos asked through their aircraft intercom as they settled into their crew positions. "Different operational environment," Thompson replied tersely, referring to an incident 6 months prior when challenging weather conditions had complicated a similar reconnaissance mission. "That was mountain terrain. This is contested airspace with active threats." As the aircraft completed final preparation and flight clearance procedures were initiated, neither crew member noticed the air traffic controller observing from the flight operations tower. Technical Sergeant Sarah, Navigator, Chen watched the mission preparation with an expression of growing concern, then spoke quietly into her headset communication system. "Tower, I recommend additional navigation support for this mission profile, given the weather conditions and terrain challenges." The flight crews completed their pre-flight procedures, received mission authorization, and prepared for departure according to the approved flight plan. From their positions, they could observe the challenging weather conditions developing over their planned operational area while conducting final coordination with flight operations and air traffic control. In the Flight Operations Center, Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell stood monitoring multiple displays showing real-time weather updates and aircraft status information. "Estimated time to operational area," he asked. 90 minutes at planned flight speed, sir," Rodriguez replied. "Weather conditions in the operational area remain marginal but within acceptable parameters for mission execution." Mitchell's expression reflected the operational complexity of the mission. Establish communication with air traffic control for continuous navigation support. The communication link activated immediately. Mitchell's voice filled the headsets of both flight operations and air traffic control personnel. "Tower control, flight operations. Primary mission requires enhanced navigation support due to marginal weather conditions and complex terrain. Acknowledge. Flight operations, tower control acknowledges enhanced navigation support protocols," came the response from the Air Traffic Control Center, though notably not from Technical Sergeant Chen, who had been monitoring the mission preparation with growing professional concern. Maintaining their departure schedule, the flight crews conducted final coordination with multiple support elements while preparing for immediate takeoff according to the approved mission timeline. Their training included extensive preparation for exactly this type of high-risk reconnaissance mission, making them highly capable of navigation and tactical operations under challenging conditions. Aircraft systems nominal, navigation equipment verified operational, Santos reported through the Tactical Communication Network. All crew positions ready for immediate departure. Thompson confirmed aircraft readiness through his flight control systems. Confirmed. All flight systems operational, mission parameters uploaded and verified. Ready for immediate departure. The Flight Operations Center's sophisticated coordination systems allowed them to monitor aircraft status and mission progress with exceptional accuracy, providing crucial support for complex aviation operations and emergency response capabilities. Mission departure in 60 seconds. Thompson reported back to flight operations, preparing to implement the approved flight plan for high-altitude reconnaissance over contested terrain. As the aircraft prepared for takeoff according to planned procedures, both crew members focused on the complex navigation and tactical requirements that would characterize their mission over challenging terrain with marginal weather conditions. When the Black Hawks finally lifted off from Fort Carson according to their approved flight plan, Santos made a quiet observation that carried across their aircraft communication system. Weather conditions look worse than forecast, she noted, observing the developing cloud formations and precipitation patterns that could complicate their planned reconnaissance mission. The aircraft before them faced challenging operational conditions. Marginal weather, complex terrain, and potential enemy activity combined to create one of the most demanding aviation environments possible for military reconnaissance operations. Flight operations, Falcon lead. Departing Fort Carson according to mission profile. Weather conditions marginal but within operational parameters, Thompson reported with professional precision. In the Flight Operations Center, this departure report generated routine acknowledgement among the mission coordination staff. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell monitored the mission progress while maintaining communication with air traffic control for navigation support. Back in the aircraft, Thompson established flight formation with the 2nd Black Hawk while maintaining proper navigation according to the approved flight plan and coordination with air traffic control for continuous position updates. Flight operations. This is Falcon lead requesting enhanced navigation support due to deteriorating weather conditions in operational area. Thompson broadcast on the primary coordination frequency. The response came immediately from Flight Operations Coordination, though not with the detailed navigation support that the challenging conditions would require for safe mission execution. Falcon lead, Flight Operations acknowledges navigation support request. Continue mission according to approved flight plan with standard navigation coordination. What followed was 40 minutes of increasingly challenging flight conditions as the aircraft encountered weather deterioration that exceeded forecast parameters and created navigation difficulties that standard coordination procedures were inadequate to address effectively. Then Thompson's voice returned over the communication system, completely changed in tone and urgency. Flight operations, Falcon lead declaring in-flight emergency. Engine failure, hydraulic system malfunction, immediate assistance required for emergency landing. The Flight Operations Center erupted in coordinated emergency response procedures. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell activated emergency protocols while coordinating with multiple support elements for immediate assistance to the aircraft in distress. Santos, monitoring aircraft systems, confirmed the emergency status over their tactical communication system. Flight operations, confirming primary engine failure and hydraulic system malfunction. Aircraft control marginal, immediate emergency landing required. Instead of coordinating the emergency response through standard procedures, Thompson made a communication that would fundamentally change the nature of the emergency response and demonstrate capabilities that had been overlooked during routine mission planning. Flight operations, Falcon lead requesting direct communication with Technical Sergeant Chen for enhanced navigation support during emergency landing approach, Thompson announced, recognizing that standard navigation coordination would be inadequate for the complex emergency approach required. Mitchell authorized the communication change, and what followed was a coordination sequence that revealed exceptional navigation capabilities that had been excluded from the mission planning despite their obvious relevance to flight safety and operational success. Falcon lead, this is Navigator control. I have detailed terrain analysis and optimal approach vectors for emergency landing in your current operational area, came the immediate response from Technical Sergeant Chen, whose voice carried confidence and technical knowledge that exceeded standard air traffic control coordination. In the Flight Operations Center, the significance of this communication began to dawn on the assembled coordination staff. Technical Sergeant Sarah Chen, who had been excluded from mission planning due to insufficient qualifications, was providing navigation coordination that exceeded the capabilities of standard flight operations support. Navigator, how do you have detailed terrain analysis for our current position? Santos asked over the emergency communication channel, her voice carrying both operational urgency and professional recognition. I conducted comprehensive terrain and weather analysis for this mission profile despite not being included in official mission planning. I have identified optimal emergency landing sites and approach vectors based on current aircraft condition and weather factors. Chen responded with characteristic precision. This explanation created immediate understanding among the flight crews and growing recognition in the Flight Operations Center that Chen possessed navigation and analytical capabilities that had been overlooked during mission planning despite their obvious relevance to flight safety. Navigator control provide immediate guidance for emergency approach. Aircraft control is deteriorating rapidly, Thompson requested, recognizing that Chen's navigation support represented their best chance for successful emergency landing. Chen's response demonstrated exceptional navigation expertise and real-time analytical capabilities that exceeded anything available through standard air traffic control coordination. Falcon lead. Turn to heading 280 degrees. Descend to 2,400 feet. I have identified emergency landing site with optimal approach conditions given your current aircraft limitations. The navigation guidance continued for 25 minutes as Chen provided detailed approach vectors, terrain warnings, and landing site coordination that enabled Thompson to maintain aircraft control despite significant mechanical failures and marginal weather conditions. Flight operations. Falcon lead executing emergency landing with Navigator control guidance. All crew prepared for emergency landing procedures, Thompson announced as Chen's navigation coordination enabled successful approach to an emergency landing site that standard coordination procedures had not identified. The emergency landing was completed successfully with no casualties, though post-incident analysis would reveal that the aircraft had been minutes from catastrophic failure that would have resulted in total loss of aircraft and crew. Flight operations. Falcon lead on ground at emergency landing site. All crew safe, aircraft secure. Navigator control guidance was essential for successful emergency landing, Thompson reported after confirming crew safety and aircraft status. This report created immediate attention throughout the Flight Operations Center as personnel recognized that Chen's excluded navigation expertise had been crucial for preventing what would have been a catastrophic aviation accident. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell took direct communication with Chen to understand how her navigation coordination had exceeded standard support capabilities. Navigator control. Explain your navigation analysis and coordination capabilities for this emergency response. Chen's response revealed navigation and analytical expertise that had been systematically overlooked despite its obvious relevance to flight safety and mission effectiveness. Sir, I conducted independent analysis of mission parameters including detailed terrain mapping, weather pattern analysis, and emergency landing site identification based on aircraft specifications and operational requirements. This capability assessment created growing recognition that Chen possessed navigation expertise that exceeded standard air traffic control qualifications and that her exclusion from mission planning had created unnecessary risks for flight operations and crew safety. Navigator control. Why was this analysis not included in standard mission planning procedures? Mitchell asked, seeking to understand the institutional factors that had excluded obviously relevant expertise from mission coordination. Sir, my navigation analysis and terrain expertise were not requested during mission planning, and my qualifications were deemed insufficient for mission coordination despite extensive navigation, training, and analytical experience. Chen responded with professional directness. The institutional recognition of overlooked expertise created immediate reassessment of qualification standards and mission planning procedures that had excluded navigation capabilities that proved essential for flight safety and operational success. During the post-mission analysis and crew recovery operations, Chen continued to provide navigation and coordination support that demonstrated systematic expertise in aviation operations and emergency response coordination that exceeded standard training requirements. Navigator control has provided navigation coordination that exceeds standard air traffic control capabilities and has been essential for successful mission execution and emergency response, Santos reported during initial post-incident communications. This assessment by experienced flight crews created formal recognition that Chen's navigation expertise represented capabilities that should have been integrated into mission planning from the beginning rather than excluded due to qualification assumptions. The aircraft recovery and crew extraction operations continued under Chen's navigation coordination, with her continued support enabling efficient recovery operations and safe return of personnel and equipment to base operations. Flight operations, recovery operations completed successfully with Navigator control coordination. All personnel and equipment recovered safely. Came the final mission report that confirmed Chen's essential role in both emergency response and recovery coordination. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell initiated immediate review of qualification standards and mission planning procedures to understand how obviously relevant expertise had been excluded from mission coordination and to prevent similar oversights in future operations. The post-mission analysis revealed that Chen's navigation analysis had identified potential emergency landing sites and approach procedures that standard mission planning had not considered, despite their obvious relevance to flight safety in marginal weather conditions. Chen's terrain analysis and weather forecasting had been more accurate than standard meteorological services, enabling more effective mission planning and emergency response coordination than conventional procedures had provided. The navigation techniques Chen had employed during emergency coordination exceeded standard air traffic control training and demonstrated advanced analytical capabilities that were immediately recognized as valuable for future mission planning and flight safety coordination. Military aviation safety organizations initiated comprehensive review of Chen's navigation techniques and analytical methods to understand how individual expertise could enhance institutional capabilities for flight safety and emergency response coordination. The flight crews who had benefited from Chen's navigation coordination provided detailed assessments of her capabilities that led to formal recognition of her expertise and recommendations for enhanced roles in aviation operations and flight safety coordination. Chen's systematic approach to navigation analysis and emergency coordination became models for training aviation support personnel in advanced navigation techniques and emergency response coordination that could enhance flight safety and operational effectiveness. The case became a precedent for the importance of comprehensive expertise assessment and inclusive mission planning that ensured all relevant capabilities were utilized for flight safety and operational success rather than excluded due to qualification assumptions. Military aviation training programs incorporated Chen's navigation techniques and analytical methods as examples of advanced coordination capabilities that could enhance flight safety and emergency response effectiveness beyond standard training requirements. Chen's attention to detail and systematic analysis during mission preparation became examples of individual preparation and professional responsibility that could enhance institutional capabilities and prevent potential aviation accidents and operational failures. The navigation coordination she had provided during the emergency response was incorporated into aviation emergency procedures training as an example of how individual expertise could enable successful emergency response when standard procedures were inadequate. Military personnel throughout the aviation community gained increased awareness of the importance of comprehensive expertise utilization and inclusive mission planning that ensured flight safety rather than excluding capabilities due to administrative or qualification limitations. Aviation safety organizations used Chen's case as an example of how individual initiative and professional expertise could enhance institutional capabilities while preventing potential aviation accidents that could result from incomplete mission planning or inadequate emergency response coordination. Chen's progression from excluded air traffic controller to essential navigation coordinator demonstrated the value of recognizing and utilizing individual expertise regardless of formal qualification limitations or administrative convenience in mission planning procedures. 6 months after the emergency response, Chen was promoted to technical sergeant and assigned to advanced navigation coordination duties where her demonstrated expertise could be utilized for enhanced flight safety and mission effectiveness. Her navigation analysis techniques were formalized and incorporated into standard aviation planning procedures, ensuring that her individual innovations would benefit future aviation operations and enhance flight safety for military aviation personnel. The emergency response coordination she had provided became a case study in aviation leadership training, demonstrating how individual expertise and initiative could address institutional limitations and enhance operational effectiveness during emergency situations. The navigation techniques Chen had developed were adopted throughout military aviation communities worldwide, influencing flight safety and emergency response training for thousands of aviation personnel and enhancing institutional capabilities for complex aviation operations. A year after the emergency response, Chen received the Air Medal for her navigation coordination during the emergency landing and the Achievement Medal for her contributions to aviation safety and navigation procedure development. Her personnel file was updated to reflect her exceptional navigation expertise and coordination capabilities, ensuring that her qualifications would be properly recognized and utilized for future aviation operations and mission planning activities. The qualification assessment procedures that had excluded Chen from mission planning were systematically reviewed and improved, leading to more comprehensive evaluation of personnel capabilities and more inclusive mission planning that enhanced flight safety and operational effectiveness. Technical Sergeant Chen continued serving in advanced navigation coordination roles, but her experience with exclusion and subsequent recognition remained classified at levels that prevented complete public acknowledgement of her contributions to aviation safety and emergency response effectiveness. The navigation coordination techniques she had developed during the emergency response were incorporated into standard aviation doctrine, improving coordination capabilities for future aviation missions and enhancing institutional capabilities for complex flight operations and emergency response. Her legacy extended beyond individual recognition to institutional improvements in aviation safety procedures, navigation coordination capabilities, and understanding of how individual expertise could enhance aviation effectiveness when properly recognized and utilized. The flight crews whose lives she had saved through her navigation coordination remained grateful throughout their careers, with many requesting Chen's navigation support for subsequent high-risk missions based on their confidence in her exceptional expertise and coordination capabilities. Technical Sergeant Sarah Navigator, Chen had transformed from an excluded air traffic controller to a legendary figure whose navigation techniques and dedication influenced an entire generation of military aviation personnel and enhanced institutional capabilities for flight safety and emergency response coordination. Her willingness to provide navigation coordination despite official exclusion had saved 8 lives and changed how military aviation understood the importance of comprehensive expertise utilization and inclusive mission planning for flight safety and operational effectiveness. The voice that had guided a crippled aircraft to safety continued to influence aviation coordination years later, as her navigation techniques and emergency response procedures were adopted by aviation personnel worldwide and became standard capabilities for military aviation operations. Her story demonstrated that true aviation effectiveness sometimes required going beyond official qualifications to provide expertise when flight safety and human lives were at stake, and that individual navigation expertise could create systematic improvements in aviation safety that benefited countless aviation personnel. The navigation coordination that had begun as excluded expertise had evolved into a new model for aviation coordination that balanced individual initiative with institutional support, ensuring that navigation expertise could be provided effectively while maintaining proper oversight and coordination with established aviation safety procedures. Chen's transformation from overlooked air traffic controller to influential navigation coordinator became a permanent reminder that aviation personnel could make their greatest contributions by combining technical expertise with dedication to flight safety and willingness to provide essential coordination regardless of official qualification limitations. 5 years later, Master Sergeant Sarah Chen was selected to lead the Air Force Navigation and Emergency Response Coordination Division, where her personal experience with exclusion informed comprehensive improvements to aviation coordination procedures and qualification assessment protocols. Her graduate research on aviation navigation coordination became classified doctrine that influenced flight safety procedures throughout military aviation, establishing protocols that enabled individual expertise while maintaining institutional oversight and coordination with established aviation safety requirements. The navigation coordination networks she had developed during her emergency response were expanded into comprehensive systems enabling real-time coordination between aviation personnel and navigation experts during complex flight operations and emergency situations worldwide. Her promotion to senior leadership positions was attributed to the visibility her navigation coordination had gained through the emergency response operation, but primarily to the consistent excellence and flight safety commitment that had originally motivated her comprehensive mission analysis despite official exclusion. The aviation personnel who had supported her navigation coordination from air traffic control centers were tracked throughout their subsequent careers, with many receiving specialized training and assignments based on their demonstrated ability to support advanced navigation operations under challenging circumstances. The emergency response recordings and navigation coordination documentation were archived as part of aviation history collections, serving as permanent examples of how individual expertise and flight safety commitment could enable successful operations that saved lives and enhanced institutional aviation capabilities. Military aviation coordination procedures implemented as a result of Chen's emergency response prevented numerous aviation accidents over the following years, ensuring that navigation expertise could be utilized effectively regardless of administrative or qualification obstacles that might exclude essential capabilities. Her legacy extended beyond personal recognition to institutional improvements that ensured future generations of aviation personnel would have proper recognition and support for navigation expertise while maintaining the individual initiative that had made her emergency coordination successful. The navigation coordination techniques she had pioneered during her emergency response became standard training for military aviation personnel assigned to complex flight operations, ensuring that her innovations would continue to enhance flight safety for decades. Chen's subsequent career in military aviation coordination enabled her to implement systemic improvements based on her personal experience with exclusion, creating lasting positive impact on aviation safety policies and procedures that enhanced flight safety and operational effectiveness. The emergency response operations transformation from excluded expertise to institutional learning created a permanent example of how individual navigation expertise could address aviation emergencies while influencing systematic improvements in aviation coordination capabilities and flight safety procedures. Military aviation organizations' confidence in coordination procedures was enhanced by witnessing how individual expertise could ensure effective navigation coordination even when institutional mechanisms were inadequate or unavailable for immediate response to aviation emergencies and flight safety requirements. The navigation coordination techniques that had enabled successful emergency response became symbolic of aviation excellence and individual commitment to flight safety, representing values that enabled effective aviation coordination under the most challenging operational circumstances and institutional limitations. Chen's story continued to inspire military aviation personnel to maintain navigation expertise and flight safety awareness while serving in professional roles, ensuring that aviation expertise could be applied to emergency coordination when flight crews required assistance or enhanced navigation support. The excluded expertise that had begun as administrative oversight became the foundation for a career dedicated to ensuring that military aviation personnel would have proper recognition and institutional support for navigation expertise, while maintaining the individual initiative that enabled effective response to aviation emergencies. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen retired after 26 years of distinguished service, having transformed from an overlooked air traffic controller providing excluded navigation coordination to one of the most influential advocates for systematic aviation coordination policies and procedures. Her career progression from excluded navigation coordinator to senior leader responsible for aviation coordination demonstrated how individual experiences with institutional limitations could inform systematic improvements that benefited entire aviation communities and the flight crews they served. The air traffic control frequencies where her voice had first guided emergency aircraft to safety became the foundation for global aviation coordination networks that continued to enable navigation assistance decades after her retirement from active aviation service. The aviation personnel who had monitored her emergency navigation coordination continued to serve with distinction, carrying forward the flight safety techniques and individual initiative that had characterized that emergency response operation throughout their subsequent aviation careers and coordination assignments. Her legacy was permanently enhanced by the demonstration that individual navigation expertise and flight safety commitment could achieve results that exceeded institutional capabilities while creating systematic improvements that enabled better aviation coordination for future generations of aviation personnel and flight crews requiring enhanced navigation support during complex aviation emergencies. The voice that had echoed across aviation frequencies during the emergency approach continued to influence aviation safety decades later, representing the pinnacle of navigation coordination excellence and individual commitment to flight safety that enabled aviation effectiveness under the most challenging circumstances. Her emergency coordination had demonstrated that sometimes the most important aviation contributions came not from following qualification standards, but from having the navigation expertise and individual initiative to provide essential coordination when flight safety and human lives were at stake. The legacy of Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen continued to influence aviation excellence long after her voice had stopped echoing across aviation frequencies, ensuring that her example of navigation coordination and flight safety commitment would inspire aviation excellence for generations to come. The navigation coordination that had guided a crippled aircraft to safety had become a permanent symbol of how individual aviation expertise could overcome institutional limitations and create lasting improvements in flight safety procedures and aviation coordination capabilities that benefited countless aviation personnel and enhanced military aviation effectiveness worldwide. Her transformation from excluded air traffic controller to influential aviation leader remained a permanent inspiration for aviation personnel, demonstrating how individual navigation expertise could influence aviation safety at the highest levels while creating institutional improvements that ensured comprehensive utilization of aviation expertise for flight safety and operational effectiveness. The emergency approach that had been guided by her excluded expertise had evolved into a legacy of aviation excellence that influenced military aviation coordination doctrine, training, and effectiveness at the highest levels of aviation leadership and flight safety management worldwide. Staff Sergeant Sarah Navigator Chen had become Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen, but her greatest legacy remained the demonstration that individual navigation expertise and flight safety commitment could achieve results that seemed impossible and create institutional improvements that benefited countless aviation personnel and enhanced military aviation safety for generations to come. The immediate aftermath of the emergency response operation created unprecedented analysis throughout the military aviation community, as flight safety experts and aviation strategists examined how a single excluded navigation coordinator had fundamentally altered the outcome of a critical aviation emergency and prevented what would have been a catastrophic loss of aircraft and crew. Within hours of the successful emergency landing, classified flight safety analyses were being distributed among aviation commands worldwide, documenting Chen's navigation coordination techniques and analyzing how her excluded expertise had revealed critical gaps in standard aviation coordination procedures and emergency response capabilities. Military aviation training centers initiated comprehensive review of navigation coordination curricula to incorporate lessons learned from Chen's emergency response, recognizing that her individual expertise had exposed significant weaknesses in institutional aviation coordination capabilities and flight safety preparation procedures. The 8 flight crew members who had been saved by Chen's navigation coordination provided detailed debriefing reports that documented her expertise from their perspective as beneficiaries of her emergency coordination, describing how her navigation guidance had provided hope and tactical precision during the most dangerous moments of aircraft failure. Military aviation psychologists studied the psychological impact of Chen's coordination on flight crews under extreme stress, documenting how knowledge that comprehensive navigation support was available had sustained morale and confidence in successful emergency response during equipment failure and marginal weather conditions. The navigation analysis Chen had conducted during her excluded preparation was systematically examined and incorporated into aviation intelligence databases, providing crucial information about terrain characteristics and emergency landing capabilities that had been unavailable through conventional aviation planning methods. Aviation organizations throughout the military reported significant improvements in their navigation coordination and emergency response procedures following implementation of reforms based on lessons learned from Chen's excluded expertise and emergency coordination. Military aviation personnel throughout all services gained increased awareness of their responsibility for comprehensive terrain analysis and navigation preparation during complex flight operations, understanding that their attention to detail could have far-reaching implications for flight safety and emergency response effectiveness. Military historians began documenting Chen's emergency coordination as a watershed moment in aviation safety procedures, demonstrating how individual expertise and flight safety commitment could influence emergency outcomes and create lasting improvements in institutional aviation capabilities and procedures. The navigation coordination techniques Chen had employed during the emergency response were analyzed and systematized by aviation technical experts, who identified innovative navigation and coordination procedures that exceeded capabilities of existing flight operations doctrine and emergency response training. International military aviation organizations requested access to training materials based on Chen's emergency coordination techniques, recognizing that her individual innovations could enhance navigation coordination capabilities for allied aviation forces worldwide. Military leadership development programs incorporated Chen's decision-making during the emergency response as a case study in professional courage and individual responsibility for aviation safety, demonstrating how excluded personnel could influence outcomes at the highest levels of aviation operations. The air traffic controllers whose standard procedures had been inadequate for the emergency response received additional training and revised protocols, with many acknowledging that Chen's case had revealed systematic weaknesses in their navigation coordination approaches and emergency response methods. Military aviation education institutions modified their curricula to emphasize the importance of comprehensive navigation analysis and systematic terrain evaluation, using Chen's excluded expertise as a cautionary example of potential gaps in standard aviation preparation and coordination procedures. The navigation techniques that had enabled Chen's emergency coordination were preserved and studied as models for navigation expertise development during complex aviation operations, with analysis revealing innovative techniques for maintaining navigation accuracy under challenging weather and emergency conditions. Military navigation communities worldwide studied Chen's coordination techniques during emergency response, identifying systematic approaches to navigation awareness and emergency coordination that could enhance flight safety capabilities during complex operational environments and emergency situations. The aviation precedents established by Chen's emergency coordination influenced flight safety procedures for years, with her navigation techniques and coordination methods being cited in subsequent aviation emergencies as examples of the importance of comprehensive navigation support and emergency response coordination. Military aviation personnel selection criteria were modified to identify individuals with the navigation expertise and flight safety commitment that Chen had demonstrated, ensuring that future aviation units would benefit from personnel capable of similar systematic navigation analysis and emergency coordination. The navigation awareness training programs Chen developed based on her emergency coordination experience became standard curricula at military aviation schools worldwide, influencing navigation and emergency response training for thousands of aviation personnel. Military aviation safety training incorporated Chen's emergency coordination as an example of how individual expertise could ensure appropriate emergency outcomes, demonstrating the responsibility of all aviation personnel for maintaining comprehensive navigation awareness and flight safety preparedness. The communication networks that had been established to share lessons learned from Chen's emergency coordination continued to facilitate improvements in aviation safety procedures, creating ongoing dialogue between navigation, flight operations, and emergency response communities about coordination techniques and flight safety preparation. Military technology development programs incorporated navigation innovations based on Chen's emergency coordination techniques, leading to improved navigation systems and procedures for maintaining flight safety during complex aviation operations and emergency response situations. The terrain awareness and navigation knowledge Chen had demonstrated during her emergency coordination influence training programs for aviation personnel operating in complex environments where navigation expertise and emergency response considerations intersected with flight safety requirements. Military contracting organizations analyzed Chen's systematic approach to navigation coordination to develop improved procedures for civilian contractors supporting aviation operations, ensuring that non-military aviation personnel understood their responsibilities for flight safety compliance and navigation coordination. The navigation advocacy skills Chen had demonstrated during her emergency coordination were studied and incorporated into training programs for aviation personnel who might serve as emergency coordinators during complex flight safety situations, improving their ability to provide navigation support effectively and maintain coordination credibility under emergency conditions. Military resource management organizations studied Chen's navigation preparation during excluded coordination activities, developing improved procedures for supporting emergency response operations and navigation coordination during extended aviation operations without conventional logistical support. The leadership qualities Chen had demonstrated through her willingness to provide navigation coordination despite official exclusion provided examples of aviation leadership that were incorporated into military aviation leadership development programs at all levels of command and professional education. Military quality assurance organizations analyzed Chen's attention to detail during navigation preparation to identify best practices for maintaining flight safety standards and procedures during challenging operational conditions when institutional oversight might be limited or unavailable. The strategic thinking Chen had demonstrated through her systematic navigation preparation provided examples of long-term planning and institutional awareness that were incorporated into advanced aviation education and strategic leadership development programs. Military environmental awareness training was enhanced based on Chen's techniques for operating effectively in challenging weather environments while maintaining focus on navigation coordination and flight safety responsibilities during extended aviation operations. The information management capabilities Chen had demonstrated during complex emergency coordination influence training programs throughout the military aviation and navigation communities, improving capabilities for organizing and presenting navigation information during complex flight safety and emergency response processes. Military organizational development specialists analyzed the impact of Chen's emergency coordination on institutional learning, documenting how individual navigation expertise could drive systematic improvements when conventional procedures were inadequate for addressing complex flight safety and emergency response challenges. The conflict resolution and coordination skills Chen had developed through her emergency response provided models for enhancing aviation personnel capabilities in emergency situations and formal coordination processes during complex institutional and operational circumstances. Military technology integration training was improved based on Chen's effective use of multiple navigation and coordination systems during emergency operations, demonstrating how individual technical competence could enhance institutional effectiveness during complex flight safety and emergency response processes. The project management and emergency coordination skills Chen had demonstrated during the aircraft emergency provided examples of effective crisis management that were incorporated into military aviation training programs for personnel managing complex emergency operations and navigation coordination. Military emergency response training incorporated Chen's navigation coordination techniques under crisis conditions, demonstrating how individual preparedness and systematic thinking could maintain flight safety compliance and navigation effectiveness during aviation emergencies and high-stress operational situations. The adaptability and learning capabilities Chen had demonstrated throughout her emergency coordination influence training programs for aviation personnel operating in rapidly changing weather and emergency environments where individual initiative was essential for flight safety and institutional success. Military strategic communication training was enhanced based on Chen's effective coordination with diverse aviation audiences during emergency operations, improving capabilities for aviation personnel communicating complex navigation information during formal emergency procedures and institutional decision-making processes. The risk assessment and navigation decision-making skills Chen had demonstrated throughout her emergency coordination provided examples of effective flight safety risk management that were incorporated into training programs for aviation personnel with navigation and emergency response responsibilities. Military performance measurement organizations analyzed Chen's systematic approach to navigation coordination and emergency response, developing improved evaluation procedures for aviation personnel with navigation and flight safety responsibilities during complex operational assignments. The innovation and creative problem-solving Chen had employed throughout her navigation coordination provided examples of effective aviation innovation that were incorporated into military aviation training programs emphasizing adaptive thinking and systematic problem-solving under emergency conditions. Military knowledge management training incorporated Chen's techniques for organizing and analyzing navigation information during complex emergency operations, improving capabilities for aviation personnel managing large amounts of navigation data during flight safety and emergency response processes. The stakeholder management and relationship-building skills Chen had developed through coordination with aviation communities influenced training programs for aviation personnel managing complex relationships during emergency operations and institutional coordination activities. Military succession planning procedures were modified based on analysis of how Chen's navigation coordination had created sustainable improvements in flight safety procedures that continued to benefit aviation safety long after her individual emergency coordination. The mentoring and development skills Chen had demonstrated through her influence on aviation training capabilities provided examples of professional development that were incorporated into military aviation mentoring programs for personnel in navigation and flight safety roles. Military change management training incorporated Chen's techniques for influencing institutional aviation procedures and flight safety practices during rapidly evolving emergency situations where individual initiative could drive systematic improvements in institutional capabilities. The communication and coordination skills Chen had demonstrated through effective interaction with diverse aviation professionals influenced training programs for aviation personnel assigned to complex coordination missions requiring interaction with multiple institutional and professional communities. Military institutional memory programs documented Chen's navigation coordination techniques to ensure that her innovations would be preserved and transmitted to future generations of aviation personnel with navigation and flight safety responsibilities. The decision-making frameworks Chen had employed during complex emergency operations under uncertainty provided models for improved navigation decision-making training throughout military aviation communities and professional education programs. Military capability development programs incorporated Chen's techniques for maximizing aviation effectiveness with limited resources, improving training for personnel assigned to resource-constrained navigation and emergency response operations. The sustainability practices Chen had developed during extended navigation coordination provided models for improving military aviation environmental responsibility and resource conservation during flight operations and emergency response activities. Military talent management organizations analyzed Chen's career progression following her emergency coordination, developing improved procedures for identifying and developing personnel with exceptional navigation potential and flight safety commitment. The navigation coordination networks Chen had influenced continued to provide operational benefits years after her emergency response, demonstrating the lasting impact of individual navigation excellence on institutional aviation capabilities and flight safety effectiveness. Military aviation doctrine development incorporated Chen's navigation coordination techniques as formal flight safety procedures, ensuring that her individual innovations became standard capabilities available to future aviation personnel with navigation and emergency response responsibilities. The navigation training programs Chen had influenced based on her emergency coordination experience became standard curricula at military aviation education institutions worldwide, influencing navigation coordination training for thousands of military aviation professionals. Military research organizations conducted comprehensive studies of Chen's navigation coordination and emergency response, publishing classified analyses that influenced aviation development and navigation coordination doctrine at the highest levels of military aviation leadership. The navigation equipment innovations that had been developed based on Chen's coordination techniques were incorporated into military aviation procurement programs, improving navigation capabilities for thousands of aviation personnel worldwide engaged in flight operations and emergency response activities. Military aviation historical preservation programs documented Chen's emergency coordination as a significant example of individual navigation excellence, ensuring that her story would inspire future generations of aviation personnel with navigation and flight safety responsibilities. The navigation procedures Chen had influenced during her emergency coordination became models for military aviation operations that were adopted by Allied aviation forces worldwide, demonstrating the international impact of her navigation coordination and flight safety expertise. Military professional development organizations analyzed Chen's career trajectory following her emergency coordination, documenting how individual navigation excellence could influence career progression and professional recognition within military aviation and flight safety communities. The navigation leadership principles Chen had demonstrated during her emergency coordination were incorporated into senior military aviation leadership development programs, influencing navigation leadership training at the highest levels of aviation command and education. Military strategic planning procedures incorporated Chen's techniques for long-term navigation coordination and institutional development, improving strategic planning capabilities for complex military aviation operations and institutional development initiatives. The navigation resilience and perseverance Chen had demonstrated throughout her emergency coordination influence training programs designed to prepare military aviation personnel for extended complex emergency operations under challenging institutional and operational circumstances. Military efficiency improvement programs analyzed Chen's optimization of navigation procedures during emergency operations, developing enhanced methods for maximizing aviation effectiveness with minimal resources during complex military aviation and emergency response operations. The navigation coordination legacy Chen had created through her emergency response continued to influence military aviation effectiveness decades after her individual coordination, demonstrating the lasting impact of individual navigation excellence on institutional aviation capabilities. Military career management programs incorporated lessons learned from Chen's progression from excluded coordinator to senior aviation leader, developing improved procedures for managing and developing personnel with exceptional navigation and flight safety potential. The navigation innovation culture Chen had fostered through her emergency coordination influenced military aviation organizational culture, encouraging individual initiative and navigation creativity within appropriate institutional frameworks and professional oversight mechanisms. Military transformation programs used Chen's navigation coordination as an example of how individual excellence could drive institutional change, demonstrating how aviation innovation could emerge from individual initiative when conventional procedures were inadequate. The navigation standards Chen had established during her emergency coordination became benchmarks for military aviation excellence, influencing performance standards and evaluation criteria for navigation coordination and flight safety personnel. Military institutional learning programs incorporated Chen's navigation coordination as a model for how organizations could learn from individual initiative and incorporate navigation innovations into formal aviation doctrine and procedures. The navigation decision-making processes Chen had employed during her emergency coordination influenced military aviation decision-making training, improving navigation judgment and decision-making capabilities for aviation personnel at all levels. Military innovation management programs analyzed Chen's navigation coordination techniques to understand how individual aviation creativity could address institutional limitations and generate innovations that enhanced organizational aviation effectiveness. The navigation communication networks Chen had influenced during her emergency coordination evolved into permanent military aviation coordination infrastructure, providing lasting operational benefits that extended far beyond her individual contribution. Military legacy programs documented Chen's transformation from excluded coordinator to aviation leader, demonstrating how individual navigation excellence could influence careers and create lasting impact on military aviation communities. The navigation procedures Chen had pioneered during her emergency coordination became fundamental elements of military aviation doctrine, ensuring that her innovations would continue to influence aviation operations for generations of military aviation personnel. Colonel Sarah Rodriguez's retirement ceremony was attended by military aviation personnel from around the world, recognizing her transformation from excluded coordinator to one of the most influential navigation leaders in military aviation history. The military aviation facility at Air Force Flight Safety Command was renamed the Rodriguez Navigation Excellence Center, in recognition of her contributions to aviation coordination procedures and institutional development. Her master's thesis on military navigation coordination became required reading at military aviation schools worldwide, influencing strategic thinking about navigation procedures and individual responsibility within institutional aviation frameworks. The navigation coordination techniques she had developed during her emergency response were incorporated into international military aviation cooperation agreements, enabling enhanced navigation coordination between allied aviation forces during complex flight operations. Military aviation personnel who had benefited from Chen's navigation coordination continued to serve with distinction throughout their careers, carrying forward the navigation excellence and individual initiative that had characterized her coordination techniques. The navigation networks she had influenced during her emergency coordination continued to provide operational benefits decades after her retirement, demonstrating the enduring impact of individual navigation innovation on institutional aviation capabilities. Chen's memoir, when finally declassified and published, became an international bestseller and was translated into dozens of languages, inspiring navigation excellence and individual initiative among military aviation personnel worldwide. The Navigation Coordination Museum at Air Force Flight Safety Command featured a permanent exhibit documenting Chen's emergency response and its impact on military aviation development, ensuring that her story would inspire future generations. International military academies incorporated Chen's navigation coordination as a core case study in aviation leadership and individual initiative, influencing military aviation education and leadership development programs worldwide. The Rodriguez Foundation for Aviation Excellence was established to provide educational opportunities for military personnel developing navigation coordination and flight safety capabilities, extending Chen's legacy beyond active military service. Military aviation excellence competitions were established in Chen's honor, encouraging continued innovation and excellence in navigation coordination among aviation personnel worldwide. The navigation doctrine that had emerged from Chen's emergency coordination continued to evolve and improve, ensuring that her legacy would continue to influence military aviation effectiveness for decades to come. Military historians documented Chen's navigation coordination as one of the most significant examples of individual aviation excellence in military aviation history, ensuring that her contributions would be permanently preserved. The navigation leadership principles Chen had demonstrated during her emergency coordination became standard elements of military aviation leadership training, influencing navigation leadership development at all levels of aviation command. Military aviation organizations worldwide continued to study Chen's navigation coordination techniques, seeking to understand and replicate the aviation excellence she had demonstrated during her emergency response coordination. The flight crews whose lives she had saved during her emergency coordination remained connected throughout their careers, forming a network of aviation excellence that continued to influence military aviation effectiveness long after the original emergency response. Chen's legacy extended beyond military aviation communities to influence navigation coordination and individual initiative training throughout all military services, demonstrating the broad applicability of aviation excellence and individual courage. The navigation coordination innovations she had pioneered during her emergency response continued to inspire new generations of military aviation personnel, ensuring that her legacy of aviation excellence and individual initiative would endure indefinitely. The voice that had guided aircraft to safety during emergency coordination had become legendary within military aviation communities worldwide, representing the pinnacle of navigation coordination excellence and individual commitment to flight safety. Her transformation from excluded coordinator to influential aviation leader remained a permanent inspiration for military aviation personnel, demonstrating how individual navigation courage could overcome institutional limitations and create lasting positive impact on military aviation effectiveness. The navigation coordination that had begun as excluded expertise had evolved into a legacy of aviation excellence that influenced military aviation coordination doctrine, training, and effectiveness at the highest levels of aviation leadership worldwide. Staff Sergeant Sarah Navigator, Chen had become Colonel Sarah Rodriguez, but her greatest legacy remained the demonstration that individual navigation coordination and flight safety commitment could achieve results that seemed impossible and create institutional improvements that benefited countless military aviation personnel. Her story continued to echo through military aviation communities decades after her retirement, inspiring navigation excellence, individual initiative, and commitment to flight safety among aviation personnel who carried forward her legacy of coordination excellence and aviation leadership. The air traffic control frequencies where her voice had first guided emergency aircraft had become symbols of aviation excellence and individual commitment, representing the values that enabled aviation effectiveness under the most challenging circumstances. Her navigation coordination had demonstrated that sometimes the most important military aviation contributions came not from following qualification standards, but from having the navigation expertise and individual initiative to provide essential coordination when flight safety and human lives were at stake. The legacy of Colonel Sarah Rodriguez continued to influence military aviation excellence long after her voice had stopped echoing across aviation frequencies, ensuring that her example of navigation coordination and flight safety commitment would inspire aviation excellence for generations to come. The emergency approach that had been guided by her excluded expertise had become a permanent symbol of how individual aviation expertise could overcome institutional limitations and create lasting improvements in flight safety procedures and navigation coordination capabilities that benefited countless aviation personnel and enhanced military aviation effectiveness worldwide.